A couple of years ago, I got my tonsils out, and I should also mention that I'm well into my 30s. I thought it would be a fairly simple recovery given that every time I'd heard about someone getting their tonsils out, that someone was usually a child. Blending what I'd learned from television, my friends, and the internet, it seemed like it would be a breeze. I just live on ice cream and mashed potatoes with lots of Netflix and sleep. Spoiler alert, it was definitely not a breeze. I found myself in the emergency room at 3 a.m, 7 days after my surgery. There was blood in my throat and the worst pain I could ever imagine. It was a really bad night, made just a little bit worse with the fact that I was alone. I was doing my best to be really tough about it though. After I'd been admitted to a room, I tried to make myself comfortable and turn on the TV. The room was fairly large for an ER room. I searched through the channels and found something that I wanted to watch. I also decided to text my boss to let him know that I probably wouldn't be into work the next day. I dug for my phone in my purse and then I found it, and when I looked up, I realized that there was a man in my room. I knew pretty much immediately that this man was not in his right mind. He was youngish, wearing a dirty t-shirt, khaki shorts, and he just stared at me, not blinking once. Hi, can I help you? I asked. The man just continued staring at me and didn't say anything. I don't think you're supposed to be in here, I said, trying to be polite. He said nothing, but began advancing toward my bed really slowly. My heart was racing and I was just thinking, leave it to me to be killed in an emergency room. I don't really remember what I said next, only that it was some version of, "You're not supposed to be here, please leave." But he just kept advancing. He was steps away from my bed when 3 cops rushed into the room. The 3 of them put their hands in front of them defensively, but used very polite and soothing tones. They then said things like, "Wrong room, buddy. Let's go this way." But they never touched him. Somehow they were able to coax him out the door and down the hall, closing the door behind them. It was surreal. I almost could have thought that I really just imagined the whole thing. Except a couple of minutes later, the doctor came to see me immediately. He addressed and apologized for my surprise visitor. "Yeah, we have an office med situation," he said, as though that explained everything. Being in a hospital is truly where we're most vulnerable, and I hadn't until then realized just how completely mashed together and exposed we can actually be. Nothing happened, but it totally could have in those minutes that we were alone together. Anyway, I lived to see another day, but guy in the hospital. Let's definitely not see each other again. About 2 years after I finished college, I was diagnosed with cancer, an aggressive bone cancer called Ewing sarcoma. I underwent 12 monthly week-long doses of chemotherapy, a month of radiation, and a 13-hour surgery to remove a big amount of bone. Sadly for me, about 14 months after I completed my first occurrence, spots were found in my lungs, which meant another surgery. And because I was at a cancer research hospital young and the first set of chemo weakened my heart, I was put on very high doses of a secondary chemo that didn't cause heart damage at experimentally high doses. At those high doses, the chemo diminished my immune system for several years and really did a number on my kidneys. So a couple of years after I completed that chemo, I got an incredibly bad infection that turned into sepsis. And after having spent over 1,000 nights in a hospital, I flipped a little and developed what's known as ICU psychosis. The incessant noise, beeping IV pumps, and certain medications, plus a lot of stress can drive you a little nuts until you get moved to a different floor or go home. So while I was in ICU, I wasn't myself. I'm normally really nice and easy to get along with, and only ever complain if it's really something major like, "I don't recognize these pills." Something of that nature. This time I was yelling, crying, argumentative. I was getting on my own nerves and I really couldn't do anything about it. So after I was moved to a regular floor, I was back to being myself, but I was really stressed out. My family actually requested that a chaplain stop in to check on my mood while my husband was at work. The first day actually went fine. I was questioning why me a lot and really depressed, but my demeanor was normal. So the chaplain stops by a couple of times and everything's fine. On the third day, though, someone else was there. It's not uncommon that they have more than one chaplain, but this guy was either the worst chaplain in history or he was definitely an imposter. He was wearing a purple hoodie and jeans and the same sport coat that the other chaplain was wearing. And not like a uniform, but like he literally took the guy's jacket. It had the usual chaplain's name tag on it. He introduced himself as the other chaplain's name, but because I'd only seen him a couple of days, I thought that maybe I was just really mixed up since I'd been really confused and agitated just a week ago. I thought maybe he's a seminary student, because he looked to be about 22 at the oldest. He sits down and he started asking me really weird hypothetical questions, like why no one celebrates Easter during the Holocaust, and do I think anyone really cares about other people, and whether I deserve my husband since I'm so difficult to deal with. I had been to this hospital dozens of times, and this was the first and only time I was ever anything but polite. And the nurses all told me no apology necessary when I finally realized I'd been difficult and they knew that I wasn't myself. So I then say, I don't know what you're getting at, maybe you should just go. And I go to hit the nurse button because I'm honestly a little freaked out at this point. He then grabs my arm before I can reach it and then squeezed it. And then he said, "You know, people like you act like you're really good people. You're actually just hateful, and I know the truth. You white credit card rich housewives just show up here for drugs." I was shocked, especially since he really wasn't supposed to know what medication I take. And I mean, it's not that unusual to be on pain medication after surgery. I mean, I had just broken my tailbone a few weeks prior. I was about to scream when he suddenly let go, got up, and then left. When the nurse came in after, I told her that the chaplain that had just come by was really inappropriate with me. She said that she would talk to the person in charge, and he said that the chaplain that was supposed to be there actually had an emergency, so they didn't have anyone that fit my description of him. So I don't know if he was just some random loony that grabbed a jacket off of a chair or what, but it was super unnerving. So to the fake and inappropriate hospital chaplain, I really hope, and I mean really hope, that I don't see you at the hospital ever again. This happened about 7.5 years ago when I was 13. My grandmother was in the hospital with pneumonia. By the time that my family got there was about 11 to 15 of us. After a little time had passed, they told us we needed to leave so that they could give her some shots. At the time, we didn't know there was a waiting room on the floor, so my uncle suggested we go down to the first floor and we could sit in the ER waiting room down there. Since there were so many of us, we had to go down on 2 separate elevators. Once we got down there, we saw 2 nurses hiding behind a door. When we asked what was wrong, they said nothing but that you could still go in there. We walked in, and it was about 2 p.m. on a Sunday. There was no one in there and the lights were off. Yes, in retrospect, we should have just turned around and walked back out, but like all the white people in horror movies, we didn't think anything of it. We met up with the rest of the family. That's when we noticed 2 other guys. The first man was sitting with his hands behind his back. The second one was standing behind him and holding his wrists together. The man that was sitting down was staring daggers right at me. After about 10 minutes of sitting and staring, a third man in a hospital security uniform came up and asked if we saw anything. Visibly confused, we said no and they told us we needed to leave. Okay. We went back to the 4th floor and found the waiting room. It was right next to the psych ward with a sign that said "Stay clear. There's a high chance of flight risks." Now, you might be thinking, what's so scary about that story? It was just a random guy staring at a 13-year-old girl. Well, a little while later, we found out what actually had happened. The man that was sitting with his hands restrained was apparently a junkie looking for a quick fix. He had apparently walked in and was told that he couldn't get any drugs without a medical reason. So he apparently pulled out a knife and stabbed the woman at reception right in the neck. Why we were allowed in the room with this man while the hospital was supposedly on lockdown, I have no idea. I also have no idea where the police were during this whole situation. The story does have a kind of a happy ending though, at least for the woman. About 2 years ago, this incident was brought up at a family gathering. My cousin said the woman did in fact survive, but she no longer works for the hospital and apparently has a lot of difficulties resulting from her injury, but she's working as a secretary for a school now. But still, I really can't believe that happened. So this took place about 2 years ago. I've been having some health issues for the past few years. Around the beginning of my health getting bad, I went to the hospital for the very first time. Earlier that day, I was sitting in a lecture trying to focus on the content. I started having a really nasty headache and my vision began to fade. I started getting really nervous about it because I got to a point where I couldn't even see anything anymore, and I started getting nauseous. Now, I later found out that it was really just a bad migraine, but I had never had one before, and my family didn't have a history of migraines, so I was really worried about losing my vision. After my sight came back, I was messaging one of my friends telling her about my concerns. She told me that she would drive me to the hospital if I really needed a ride. I was extremely grateful to her since it was around midterms and we were both really busy. I took her up on that offer and we ended up going to the hospital after my lecture was finally over. We went inside the hospital. Now, for those of you that's not really familiar with the Canadian healthcare system, we often have really long waiting times. I figured that we'd be there for a while, so we decided to hunker down in a set of chairs a bit away from the main waiting area, as there were none actually available in the waiting area. A couple of hours passed and we were just chilling on our phones and talking. The nurse then wheels out this man in a wheelchair, covered with a blanket, and sits him on the wall opposite of us. I briefly look up to see him staring right at us, but I didn't really pay any mind to it. Eventually, he strikes up a conversation, asking about us. Again, no red flags, so we make friendly conversation with him. The conversation fades and he rolls away. He comes back and then he starts staring again. I start to get really uncomfortable and I text my friend. I begin to look over at him and this dude has his hand right under his blanket and there's some kind of jerking motion. I also noticed part of his leg that wasn't covered with the blanket and it looked like his pants were slightly lowered. He starts to make grunting noises and I freeze. I really want to laugh because I'm just so uncomfortable. I text my friend and tell her, and she says to just ignore it. She looks uncomfortable as well. A few emergency personnel walk by, but they don't really notice. I'm honestly too scared to really say anything about this because what if he's actually just really injured and he's trying to shield wherever the injury is? So eventually there's a really louder groan, and then he goes quiet. He continues to just stare at us for a good 30 minutes or so before a nurse comes and brings him to another room. This was by far the most uncomfortable hospital experience that I've ever had. So did the guy in the wheelchair that was totally yanking it in the hospital. I hope we don't encounter each other ever again. You're absolutely disgusting. In late January of this year, I, a 15-year-old female, was committed to an adolescent mental hospital for a suicide attempt. Something that was really stupid on my part, but not really crucial to the story. Just background information as to why I was there. This was the first time that I was ever sent to a facility like this, and having severe anxiety disorder, I was scared out of my mind. Cue the first run-in with Arthur. I won't speak too much on his physical appearance, but he was a 17-year-old male, and he looked like the classic school shooter-esque kid. Heavy boots, all black clothing, long hair, etc. No judgment though, I was fairly edgy myself when I was younger. On my first day there, I noticed right away that he would be staring at me. The first thing he said to me was, "Hey, I like your boots," which was pretty normal. I really appreciated the comment, so I opted to start talking to him. A really big mistake on my part. We started off simply by talking about books and music, of which we had similar tastes in. But then Arthur would start sitting next to me at every group meeting, every meal, and literally just about everything. I guess following me would be a better phrase. His words started getting more concerning as time went on. I saw a number of red flags, but it's not like I could really do anything. We were being held in a hospital. I couldn't just leave. I actually have exact quotes from him because I kept a journal at my time from the hospital. Here's some of them. "You seem like you have no corruption. You're an outlier. Everyone here is a degenerate. You know that there's sociopaths here, right?" Hinting at himself. But this was just the beginning. Things didn't really heat up, that is, until he started giving me poems. Poems with really eerie and biblical and religious references that he would always slide under the door of my room. I don't have any of the original poems. The hospital had confiscated them, so I'm going to try and summarize based on my journal entries. There was, of course, the poem where he had said that I was the Virgin Mary, which I find incredibly funny now, but was really scary at the time. In the poems, he would always romanticize me in an angelic kind of way, and he seemed to contrast himself as a demon. The last poem that he gave me was really concerning. He seemed to be counting down the days of something. He referred to some Catholic day of reckoning that for the life of me I can't really remember, but it was really clear that this day of reckoning somehow involved me. I finally reported this to one of the staff members and they moved me into a different unit. I later found out that after my discharge, apparently Arthur was schizophrenic. I'm really glad I said something when I did because that probably would have ended really bad for me. Thank God it didn't. I want to give a trigger warning for suicide and self-harm. 2015 to 2017 was a very, very bad part of my life. My best friend committed suicide in May of 2015. My uncle did the same in September. I was in my senior year, but I was spiraling gradually. I have a history of mental illness dating all the way back to when I was 10, but things just seemed to be getting worse and worse over time. The following year, I had to repeat my senior year because I had too many absences. I had a lot of weekly therapy appointments and bad mental health days where I really couldn't do anything, and my anxiety had reached a point where I was constantly on the verge of a panic attack. At the start of senior year part 2, 2 of my very close family friends died in a house fire. I stayed home from school for about a week. Then the same month, my grandpa died, and shortly after that, my grandma died. After that, I was officially not functioning as a human being. I got so bad that I wasn't going to school at all. I just couldn't. I was sleeping nearly 20 hours a day, barely eating, and wouldn't even leave my room unless I had to feed my cat or go to the bathroom. The school eventually told me that I wasn't allowed back on campus unless I re-enrolled. In December 2016, my maternal grandma got me a job as a housekeeper at the old folks' home that she worked at. I was there for about 2 weeks before I had a massive panic attack in an elevator. I was dry heaving, hyperventilating, and I couldn't stop crying. When I recovered, I ended up quitting because it was just too humiliating. I was also living with my sister, our mom, and her husband at the time. They got married in October of 2016. He was awful. It started with him making jokes about burying my sister and I's cats. Then he kept letting my sister's dog out without the lead. Then he kept putting him into the garage in the heat of summer in the Midwest. A couple of times when the dog got out and when we were searching for him, my stepdad would always complain that it was taking too long. Once it was an early October morning and he actually let the dog run outside without the lead, and we were all searching. I was woken up by my mom and put on the first bottoms I could find, which were cut-off denim shorts. It was really rainy as I was running up and down every street near our house looking for our dog. Thankfully, my mom found him and we got in the car to go home. The only thing my stepdad had to say was that I shouldn't be wearing shorts that were so short. There's so much more that I could tell you about him. He's the sole reason we actually lost our house. After that happened, we all had to just basically scatter. I was living at our dad's and the rest of them were living with my mom's mom, which was my grandma. I thought it would be okay for me to essentially live alone, but I quickly started feeling really lonely. One night I had a panic attack that was so bad I fell into an old coping mechanism where I self-harmed, but it turned worse. Now, this wasn't the first time I attempted, but it was the only time that ended with me in the hospital. I told my mom, who came to get me and took me to the hospital. They bandaged me up, a few therapists came in to talk to me, and eventually I was sent to Inpatient. Inpatient was really nice. We had snack time twice a day, meals 3 times a day, and there was always a group you could join. There was a TV with a couple of couches, and most of us gathered over there. There was a friend that I knew from my brother's friend group in there too, and he kinda kept this guy who was creeping on me away. Anyways, it was a Sunday after dinner and we were all back in the adult wing. Whenever I was bored, I would walk to the halls to pass time. The halls are kind of in a straight line with the nurses in the middle, and next to them is the main area. You have to walk around the nurses station to get down the other hall, and there's these huge metal doors that close in case of an emergency. I was walking down the opposite hall from my room. As I was passing the main area, I noticed a guy was getting really upset and the nurses trying to talk him down. He just kept saying how he missed his family. As I got to the hall with my room, the doors closed. We were all told to go to our rooms, but none of us wanted to be alone because we didn't know what was happening. So we all sat on the floor and just quietly talked. We could hear him get violent. We had to have been sitting there for at least an hour because the nurse came back with a snack cart and let us have some juice, cheese, and yogurt. Another hour passed and we were told to go to bed and that our nurses will give us our meds as soon as they can. I went back to bed, and during the morning, he wasn't in the adult wing at all. I never saw him again after that, but I hope to God that he's okay. I'm 24 years old and I live in the UK. I work as a pharmacist at a hospital and I usually do night shifts. My workplace is just a few lots away from home, so I usually just walk every night. A couple of months ago, I was on my way to work at around midnight. A car stopped in front of me and rolled down his window. The guy inside was wearing a scrub suit. He had dark hair, chubby, and was probably around my age. "Hey, where are you heading? Let me drive you to work." I politely declined. The guy looked harmless, and I guess being polite wouldn't really hurt. He looked pretty normal, but there was something in his eyes that just really unsettled me. He didn't go away after that and just kept on insisting to drive me to work. That's when I snapped and I told him that I was waiting for my boyfriend. He seemed to believe me, and then he just drove away. A couple of days passed by when I then got a chat request. I tried to check the profile and saw that it was the creepy lad offering to ride me to work. How he got my name, I have no idea. I didn't really pay his chat any attention and just went on with my pretty busy life. 2 days after that, I got another message from him saying, "You were smiling earlier. You look really cute." After reading that message, it honestly felt like I had been splashed with an ice-cold bucket of water. I mean, was he at the hospital? I didn't want to know. I told him to stay away from me and F off. Days have passed and I've almost forgotten about this guy. That is, until I see him standing in the hallway looking at me while I was exiting the room doing my rounds. He tried to approach me. Not happening. I beelined my way to the other hallway and went back to the pharmacy. That's when I started freaking out and then told my boyfriend. He told me that from now on I should really just drive to work instead of walking. And I did that right after that night. I also blocked him to avoid any unwanted and future creepy messages. So far, I haven't seen him in months, and I really want to keep it that way. So to that creepy lad who kept on insisting in driving me to work and stalking me at the hospital, let's definitely not encounter each other again.